Hello and welcome back. I'm so happy to have you again for today's reading. So we're going to continue where we left off. So we are in chapter 34, and I'm going to be reading verse 36 once again for you, which says, "Say, verily my Lord enlarges and restricts the provisions to whom he pleases, but most men know not." So provisions, the number is 3843. So in the concordance, in Hebrew, it's lebeino, and it's from the whiteness of the clay, altar of brick tile. So Genesis 11:3. And they said one to another, "Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar." Alright, so I'm going to read the commentary for you from Bible Ref. So it says, "The previous verses revealed that the peoples of the earth had not yet divided and scattered into separate tribes and nations, but they had remained a single group with a single culture and language. Together they had migrated to the region of Shinar, where Babylon would be established." So Shinar from Abarim means cast out a breach, that what is young or shakes, growls, a tooth town or a city of wit. So it says from the root Sir, which expresses intense negative emotions and experience of violence, from the root na'ar, to growl, shake, or be young, from the verb shanan, to be sharp, and the noun ear, city. And then it says here in a little bit about Shinar in the Bible. It is this region in southern Mesopotamia where Nimrod's kingdom commenced. It is also the location of the Tower of Babel. And they say that scholars assume that Shinar is the Hebrew interpretation of what is referred to as Sumer. And they say by the time of the invasion of Canaan, Shinar was a hotspot of culture and wealth. When Achan foolishly purloined some of Ai's spoils, his interests were also kindled by a rope from Shinar, which was then apparently as recognizable as an army coat is now in Joshua 7:21. And Shinar was also among the destination of exiled Judahites in Daniel 1:2, but through the prophet Isaiah, God promised to bring his people home from there in Isaiah 11:11. In one of his enigmatic visions, the prophet Zechariah foresaw a temple dedicated to wickedness in Shinar in Zechariah 5:11. And then it says, "We are told that together these people made plans to build a huge structure in their new homeland." And it says, "This verse seems oddly specific in describing their building materials: bricks hardened by burning or baking, and mortar made from tar." And they say that scholars suggest that there is a wordplay going on, connecting the words for these building materials to the name of Babel. And then it says here that Genesis 11:1-9 recounts one of the most dramatic acts of God recorded in the Bible. And then it says that to keep humanity from being too powerful and lapsing into widespread sin, which inspired the flood, God confuses human language and scattered mankind around the world. And then the city of Babel, similar to the Hebrew word for confused, would later become known as Babylon. And so I feel like this part here is the most prophetic. It says that Genesis 11 contains 3 sections. So God confuses and scatters the people of the world to stop the building of Babel and its tower. A genealogy is provided showing the direct link between Noah and Abraham, and the generations of Terah are introduced, providing a description of the family out of which God will call Abraham to become the father of his chosen people. So if we take this to apply to our modern times and to God's anointed, God is saying that in the current environment, he plans to confuse and scatter and dissolve the plans of the enemy. That is what's going to be in line with his judgment, and he's going to stop them from fully realizing this plan of theirs. But in their effort to realize the plan, they're also bringing about their own downfall through their own hands' work. And so the genealogy providing the direct link between Noah and Abraham. So God is establishing his anointed and his people under his covenant, and he's, separating them and distinguishing them, true believers, from the rest of the flock. And so these people will go on to carry out God's will on the earth and will inherit the legacy of their forefathers, the prophets which came before them. Then we're going to continue with Exodus 1:14. Actually, you know what? I'm going to read to you some of the commentaries on Genesis 11. I think it was 3 from Bible Hub. So it says here, bricks in the East usually are simply dried in the sun, and this produces a sufficiently durable building material. And it says these nomads had learned that clay, when burnt, becomes insoluble, and their buildings with slime or native pitch. And if we look up pitch, it says, the definition of it says, the quality of a sound governed by the rate of vibration producing it, the degree of highness or lowness of tone. And then it says, thrown or flung roughly or casually. And then it also says, the steepness of a slope, especially of a roof. And the definition for slime is a slippery substance typically regarded as repulsive. And they're buildings with repulsive substances or native low vibrations. For cement would be virtually indestructible. So that's what they thought, right? But in fact, it was scarcely possible to detach the bricks one from another, as the cement by which they were united was most tenacious. And so we can take this with the negative interpretation of those words to imply that, once they've gotten their hands dirty, they can't get out of the mess. And so if they've associated themselves with these plots, then they have to face the consequences. They've concurred or come into agreement with as a result of their participation. And it could also imply that God hardened their heart. And so, just like Pharaoh, he became most tenacious when it came to remaining obstinate and defiant, regardless of whatever warnings were sent his way, and plagues, and whatever calamity struck, he remained true to his hard-heartedness. And so, it could also imply that the evil ones, they'll stick together in this endeavor, and they unite because they have a common enemy, and they stick together despite their hard-heartedness, and also because they share the same outlook. And so it says, I'm going to read it once again. It says, so it was scarcely possible to detach the bricks one from another, as the cement by which they were united was most tenacious. And so, it takes them coming together in order for them to realize their evil plans. So I'm going to read another commentary. So it says here, the country, being a plain, yielded neither stone nor mortar, yet this did not discourage them. But they made brick to serve instead of stone, and slime instead of mortar, a kind of clay or pitch called bitumen, which was, as Pliny testifies, is liquid and glutinous and fit to be used in brick buildings. As many others observe, and that Babylon was built with this and with brick, as is here said. And it says, it has been thought that they intended hereby to secure themselves against the waters of another flood, but if they had, they would have chosen to build upon a mountain rather than upon a plain. And then it says, but two things it seems they aimed in building. First, to make them a great name out of pride and vainglory, to erect a monument that should remain to all posterity, and two, to prevent their dispersion, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. And then it was done in disobedience to that command in Genesis 9:1, which says in the NIV, then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. And then with regards to replenish the earth, that they might be united in one glorious empire, they resolved to build the city and tower, to be the metropolis of their kingdom and the center of their unity. And when I was reading the country being a plain, the country being two-dimensional, flat, possibly not yielding good potential, because it yielded neither stone nor mortar. If we regard stones to symbolize things divine in the same way that the chief cornerstone is the stone rejected. And then it says here from Bible meanings that mortar, like clay, signifies the good whereof the mind, will, heart, and motions of man is formed. Since it says here in Jeremiah 18:6, as the clay in the potter's hand, so are we in thy hand, the house of Israel. And then it says here in the King James Version dictionary definition for mortar that It's a mixture of lime and sand with water used as cement for uniting stones and bricks and walls. So if the lime is slacked and the materials mixed with lime water, the cement will be much stronger. Okay, so it says here from Bible Study Tools that Sid is translated as lime in Isaiah 33:12, and the word is spelled Sidh, and the peoples shall be as the burnings of lime, as thorns cut down that are burned in the fire. And in Amos 2:1, he burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. And it is translated plaster in Deuteronomy 27:2, thou shalt set thee up great stones and plaster them with plaster. So commentary on the verse from the same site says, from Isaiah 33:12, like chalk, peoples that are burnt to make lime of, which may denote not only their hardness and impenitency, which brought upon them and issued in the wrath of God, but the miserable condition into which they are brought, and the torture they should be put to. Perhaps this may refer to the casting of the beasts and false prophets alive into the lake burning with fire and brimstone in Revelation 19:20. So the verse says, and the people shall be as the burnings of lime, and then it continues, as thorns cut up shall they be burned into the fire. Thorns are a fit simile to express the unfruitfulness, uselessness, and harmfulness of wicked men, particularly the sons of Belial, the followers of the Antichrist, and these cut up and so green and moist, but dry and fit fuel for the fire, which burn the more easily and quickly, makes the metaphor more agreeable. And it says the burning of Rome seems here to be pointed at in Revelations 17:16 and 18:8. So 17:16 reads, the beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And then 18:8 it says, therefore in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine, and she will be consumed by fire. For mighty is the Lord God who judges her. And if I go back to the previous section for the first line in this verse, where it says, in reference to the casting of the beasts and false prophets alive into the lake burning with fire and brimstone in Revelation 19:20, that reads, but the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet prophets who had performed the signs on its behalf. With these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The 2 of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. Some commentary on this from Bible Hub says the 2 images of destruction are singularly vivid. The lime kiln and the oven, which was fed with thorns, were alike in this. The outcome of their work was seen in a residuum of ashes. And then it says here we have the proud and false destroyer, justly reckoned with for all his fraud and violence. The righteous God often pays sinners in with their own coin. Those who by faith humbly wait for God shall find him gracious to them as the day. So let the strength be. If God leaves us to ourselves any morning, we are undone. We must every morning commit ourselves to him and go forth in his strength to do the work of the day. When God arises, his enemies are scattered. True wisdom and knowledge leads to strength of salvation, which renders us steadfast in the ways of God. And true piety is the one and only treasure which can never be plundered or spent. The distress Jerusalem was brought into is described. God's time to appear for his people is when all their other helpers have failed. Let all who hear what God has done acknowledge that he can do everything. Sinners in Zion will have much to answer for above other sinners, and those that rebel against the commands of the word cannot take its comforts in time of need. His wrath will burn those everlastingly who make themselves fuel for it. It is a fire that shall never be quenched, nor ever go out of itself. It is the wrath of an ever-living God, preying on the conscience of a never-dying soul. And then in another commentary, they referenced Isaiah 30:33, and then it says here in the NIV, Temperate has long been prepared. It has been made ready for the king. Its fire pit has been made deep and wide, with an abundance of fire and wood. The breath of the Lord, like a stream of burning sulfur, sets it to blaze, or ablaze. Okay, so it says here, from, once again, Bible Study Tools on Amos 2:1, which reads, Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Moab. And then the commentary reads, for that segment of the verse, or the Moabites who descended from the eldest son of Lot by one of his daughters, and though related, were great enemies to the Israelites. They sent for Balaam to curse with them when on their borders, and greatly oppressed them in the times of the judges. And so then it continues, and for I will not turn away the punishment thereof. And the commentary on that segment of the verse reads, Idolatry, as well as the sin next charged, must be one of these 4 transgressions. The idols of Moab were Chemosh and Baal-peor of the former, and they say see Jeremiah 48:7, which reads, For because thou hast trusted in thy works, and in thy treasures thou shalt be taken, and Chemosh shall go forth in captivity with his priests and his princes together. And then it says, the strong works and fortifications they had made about their cities, and so thought themselves safe in them, which is the sense of the Septuagint and Vulgate Latin versions, and those that follow. And then in other interpretations, it's interpreted as their cattle and other possessions, as the word is rendered in 1 Samuel 25:2, which they observe. It may very well be understood of their idols, the works of their hands, in which they place their confidence, and therefore their chief god, after mentioned, is threatened to be taken and carried away. Their gold and silver and other riches they had heaped together. And then it says, some particular city seems to be meant in this case, the city of Moab, or Ar of Moab, or Horonaim in Jeremiah 48:4 and 5. And then it says, this was the god of the Ammonites in Judges 11:24, and the Moabites in 1 Kings, and then in 2 Kings. Hence the Moabites are called the people of Chemosh in Numbers 21. And then it says, which Philo the Jew explains thus, that is, thy people in power are found blind and deprived of sight, and says that Chemosh is interpreted as grouping or feeling, which is the property of one that cannot see. Mosh in Hebrew signifies to grope or feel, and kaf is a servile letter and a note of similitude, and by another Jewish writer, Chemosh is called the god of the blind. And then some take it to be the same idol with Baal-peor, though by some the Priapus of the heathens, or the god of animal and vegetative fertility of the heathens. So pagan god who references those aspects or represents those aspects in nature. And then it says, Camus, the god of festivals and merriment, seems to have had his name from hence. Very probably it's probable to say that the sun was worshipped by the Moabites under this name, which may be so called from its swiftness, for the Arabic word kamash signifies swift and hastening, as the sun is to run its race. So the Moabites put their trust in their deity, and to let them see that he would be of no avail unto them in this time of their distress, he himself should be taken away by the enemy out of his temple, for the sake of the gold or silver that was upon him, and with him the priests that attended his service, or his worshippers, and the princes of the nation that served him, and supported the worship of him, and defrayed the expenses of it. And then Hosea 9:10 reads, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe in the fig tree at her first time, but they went to Baal-peor and separated themselves unto that shame, and their abominations were according as they loved. So this commentary is a bit longer, and it says, not Jacob or Israel personally, with the few souls that went down with him into Egypt, for these died in Egypt, and never returned from thence, or came into the wilderness to be found, nor Israel in a spiritual sense, the objects of electing, redeeming, and calling grace, though it may be accommodated to them who in their natural state are as in a wilderness, in a forlorn, hopeless, helpless, and uncomfortable condition, in which the Lord finds them, seeking them in redemption and by his Spirit in the effectual calling, when they are like grapes, not in themselves, being destitute of all good, and having nothing but sin and wickedness in them. For whatever good thing is in them at it says here conversion, but I would say at possibly rebirth, it is not found, but put there. But the simile may serve to express the great and unmerited love of God to his people, who are as agreeable to him as grapes in the wilderness to a thirsty traveler, and in whom he takes great delight and complacency, notwithstanding all their sinfulness and unworthiness, and bestows abundance of grace upon them, and makes them like clusters of grapes indeed. And such were many of the Jewish fathers, and who are here intended, even the people of Israel brought out of Egypt into the wilderness of Arabia, through which they traveled to Canaan. Here the Lord found them, took notice and care of them, provided for them, and protected them, and gave them many tokens of his love and affection. And so this exodus or migration, we can see parallels to people of the Abrahamic traditions across time. And then it says here, see Deuteronomy 32:10, which reads, in a desert land he found him, in a barren and howling waste. He shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. And so I believe this could apply to the Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as well. And so it continues, and they were as acceptable to him, and he took as much delight and pleasure in them as when traveling through the deserts of Arabia, or any other desert, would rejoice at finding a vine laden with clusters of grapes. The design of this metaphor is not to compare Israel with grapes because of any goodness in them, and as a reason of the Lord's delight in them, for neither for quantity nor quality were they like them, being few and very obstinate and rebellious, but to set forth the great love of God to them, and his delight and complacency in them, which arose and sprung not from any excellency in them, but from his own sovereign goodwill and pleasure. And so when they mention here Israel, we can take that to refer to the believers or people who belong to any of the Abrahamic traditions, to the Christian community, to the Muslim community. And they say, see Deuteronomy 7:6-8, which reads, for you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. The Lord did not set his face or his affection on you and chose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all people, But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your ancestors that he brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And then if we read Deuteronomy 9:5, so it is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God will drive them out before you to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And then Deuteronomy 9:6, so understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land of possession, for you are a stiff-necked people. And then it goes on in 10:15, yet the Lord set his affection on your ancestors and loved them, and he chose you, their descendants, above all the nations as it is today. And the commentary continues for the next segment, which reads, I saw your fathers as the first ripe and the fig tree at her first time. The Lord looked upon their ancestors when they were settled as a people in their civil and church state upon their being brought out of Egypt with as much pleasure as a man beholds the first ripe figs his fig tree produces after planting it, or the first it produces in the season, the fig tree bearing twice in a year, but the first is commonly most desired, as being most rare and valuable. And such were the Israelites to the Lord at first. And we see Micah 7:1. It says, Israel's misery. What misery is mine? I am like one who gathers summer fruit at the gleaning of the vineyard. There is no cluster of grapes to eat, none of the early figs that I crave. And then Jeremiah 2:2, go and proclaim in the hearing of Jerusalem, this is what the Lord says. I remember the devotion of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and followed me through the wilderness, through a land not sown. And then this is observed to aggravate their ingratitude to the Lord, which soon discovered itself, and to suggest that their posterity were like them, who, though they had received many favors from the Lord as tokens of his affection to them and delight in them, yet behaved in a most shocking and shameful manner to him. But they went into Baal-peor, committed whoredom with that idol, even in the wilderness, where the Lord found them and showed so much regard to them. This refers to the history in Numbers 25:1-18. So Moab seduces Israel, and it reads, while Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meal and bowed down before these pagan gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. The Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of these people, kill them and expose them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the Lord's fierce anger may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to Israel's judges, each of you must put to death those of your people who have yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor. Then an Israelite man brought into the camp a Midianite woman right before the eyes of Moses and the whole assembly of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and followed the Israelite into the tent. He drove the spear into both of them, right through the Israelite man and into the woman's stomach. Then the plague against the Israelites was stopped. But those who died in the plague numbered 24,000. The Lord said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned my anger away from the Israelites, since he was as zealous for my honor among them as I am. I did not put an end to them in my zeal. Therefore tell him I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant of a lasting priesthood, because he was zealous for the honor of his God and made atonement for the Israelites. The name of the Israelite who was killed with the Midianite woman was Zimri, son of Salu, the leader of a Simeonite family. And the name of the Midianite woman who was put to death was Cosbi, daughter of Zur, a tribal chief of a Midianite family. The Lord said to Moses, "Treat the Midianites as enemies and kill them. They treated you as enemies when they deceived you in the Peor incident involving their sister Cosbi, the daughter of a Midianite leader, the woman who was killed when the plague came as a result of that incident." And so it continues, Baal Peor is by some interpretations referred to as the pagan lord or god of opening, and was so called either from the opening of his mouth in prophecy as a god of Babylon. From which the image of the idol is figured. And it says, whose worshippers took him to be inspired and opened their mouths to receive the divine afflatus from him. So afflatus means inspiration, so to receive their own perverted inspiration from him. So it says, others interpret it as the pagan god of nakedness, because his worshippers exposed themselves to their posteriors in a shameful manner, and even those parts which ought to be covered. And it says this is the sense of most Jewish writers. Yes, it says here, so the worshippers of Peor are represented in like manner as most filthy and obscene. And it says here that it was a known thing that the worshippers of Peor were worshipped by uncovering their nakedness. And it says, and this he makes to be the reason why God commanded the priests to make themselves breeches to cover their nakedness in the time of service, and why they might not go up to the altar by steps, that their nakedness might not be discovered. In short, they took this Peor to be no other than a Priapus, and in this they are followed by, or once again, Priapus, a pagan god of fertility and cultivation in nature. And then they follow that the representation of this archetype who is observed as Baal Peor is the god of the Moabites, the pagan god. So there was an idol in Moab called Baal, the pagan god of gardens. And then some say it could either be the name of a mountain, and it says of which is spoken of in Numbers 23:28, which says, and Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor overlooking the wasteland. And then it continues, where Balaam was worshipped, and so was called from thence Baal Peor, as Jupiter Olympus. Capitolinus is also called thus from the mountain of Olympus, where divine honors were paid to Capitolinus. Who were deified and worshipped. And they say Capitolinus was a man of great esteem, potentially, who was deified by the Moabites and worshipped by them after his death. And so they're suggesting here that it could be that Baal-peor may have been a person. And so this was how his memory was perverted, or the shape that it evolved into. Since they're suggesting that Peor could be the name of a man, or it could have just been a figment of their imagination, or could have referenced a demon. Because it says here, the reason they suggest that Peor is the name of a man, since they say we read of Beth Peor, or the temple of Peor, in Deuteronomy 34:6, which says he buried him in Moab in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. And so these are just some suggestions, some ideas. And so the following segment of the verse reads, and separated themselves onto that shame. So they separated themselves from God. So the Israelites who fell into disbelief and his worship, the true God, and joined themselves to that shameful idol and worshipped it, thought by many as before observed to be the Priapus of the Gentiles, in whose worship the greatest of obscenities were used, not fit to be named, so that this epithet of shame is with great propriety given it, and aggravates the sin of Israel, that such a people should be guilty of such filthy practices. Though Baal, without supposing him to be Priapus, or a pagan deity of nature, may be called that shame for Baal and Bosheth, which signifies shame. And then they reference, and then so Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, is called Jerubesheth in Judges 8:35 and 2 Samuel 11:21. And Eshbaal appears plainly to be the same son of Saul, whose name was Ishbosheth in 1 Chronicles, 2 Samuel. And Meribbaal is clearly the same with Mephibosheth in 1 Chronicles, 2 Samuel. And it says, yes, so it may be observed that the prophets of Baal are called, in the Septuagint version of 1 Kings 18:25, the prophets of that shame. So that verse reads, Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, your pagan god, but do not light the fire. Yes, so it says, the prophets of that shame, every idol and all idolatry, being shameful, and the cause of shame sooner or later to their worshippers, especially when things obscene were done in their religious rites, as were in many of the heathens in which the Jews followed them. So they reference Jeremiah 3:24. From our youth, shameful gods have consumed the fruits of our ancestors' labor, their flocks and herds, their sons and daughters. Jeremiah 3:25. Let us lie down in our shame, and let our disgrace cover us. We have sinned against the Lord our God, both we and our ancestors, from our youth till this day. We have not obeyed the Lord our God. And then we have 11:13 from Jeremiah. You, Judah, have as many pagan gods as you have towns, and the altars you have set up to burn incense to that shameful god Baal are as many as the streets of Jerusalem. And the last segment of the verse reads, and their abominations were according as they loved, or as they loved them, the daughters of Moab, for it was through their impure love of them that they were drawn into these abominations, or to worship idols, which are often called abominations, or as is read and gives the sense, and they were abominations as they loved them. That is, according to the measure of the love wherewith they loved them. So they were abominations in... Yes, this is, and they were abominations as I love them. That is, according to the measure of the love wherewith I love them. So they were abominations in my eyes. They were as detestable now as they were loved before. And so going back to Amos 2:1, so the last segment of that verse reads, because he burnt the bones of the king of Edom into lime. So either like to lime or for lime, he burnt them thoroughly till they came to powder as small and as white as lime, and used them instead of it to plaster the walls of his palace. Yes, to plaster the walls like mortar, right? And it says, by way of contempt, as the Targum reads, and it says, and that the ashes of the bones of one man would not be sufficient to plaster a wall, and besides can never be brought to such a consistency as to be fit for such a purpose. Yet, if it came only by means of bare burning, so as that they became like lime, as the color of it, it could not be thought so very barbarous and inhumane, since it was the usage of some nations, especially the Romans, to burn their dead. No doubt something shocking is intended, so take this spiritually, and which usage to the dead is resented by the Lord. Right, so the Blue Letter Bible commentary on Amos 2, it says here, the sins they are charged with were injustice, oppression, whoredom, the aggravations of those sins, the temporal and spiritual mercies God had bestowed upon them, for which they had made him such ungrateful returns, and God's complaint of them for their sins, and his threatening of their ruin and their utter inability to prevent it. And right, so they perverted justice. This was the sin of those who were entrusted with the administration of justice. The judges and the magistrates and all parties concerned. And you can continue to read the commentary to get further revelation on and with regards to God's judgment on those who remain set in their ways, and for those who fall back on their belief and turn away from the Lord once again. I mean, here's one way of looking at this definition for mortar, which reads once again, a mixture of lime and sand with water. So a mixture of, because the idols, let's say they're made out of marble, and so they're crushed, and so they they turn into white powder, like lime, and sand, which can represent the multitude of people on this earth. So a mixture of lime and sand. So the crushing of the idols and the disbelievers with water, with the word of God, used as cement for uniting stones and bricks and walls. So the very reality and fact of, with regards to the justice, judgment, and the true statements of the Lord found in his word, unite the stones and bricks in walls, which are fences around, and they protect the city, the heart of a faith. It says, if the lime is slacked, and so the definition for slacked is slake, to quench or satisfy one's thirst. It says to combine quicklime with water to produce calcium hydroxide. And then it says also slacked, to make less active, vigorous, intense. Yes, so abate, moderate, to relieve or satisfy with water or liquid. It says to cause lime to heat and crumble by treatment with water. And so therefore, if the lime is slacked, if the pagan idols in their powdered state become even more just slacked, even more disgraced, and the materials mixed with lime water, the cement will be much stronger. So if they are pulverized, they are completely demolished, admonished, and it is made abhorrently clear, horrifically clear, how devastating their state is. If they're absolutely relieved of their power and position in the world and the way that they continue to deceive, and thus the materials are mixed with lime water, the cement will be much stronger. So once it is made incredibly clear, then the clarity through all of this makes the binding factor that much more resilient. Okay, so one last commentary I'm going to read on Genesis 11:3 reads, how soon men forget the most tremendous judgments and go back to their former crimes. Though the dissolutions of the deluge were before their eyes, though they sprang from the stock of righteousness of Noah, yet even during his lifetime wickedness increases exceedingly. Nothing but the sanctifying grace of the Holy Spirit can remove the sinful lusts of the human will and the depravity of the human heart. God's purpose was that mankind should form many nations and peoples and lands. In contempt of the divine will and against the counsel of Noah, the bulk of mankind unites to build a city and a tower to prevent their separating. Idolatry was begun, and Babel became one of its chief seats. They made one another more daring and resolute. Let us learn to provoke one another to love and to good works, as sinners stir up and encourage one another to wicked works, or wicked horrors. And then Exodus 1:14, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the fields. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. Ye shall no more give the people straw to make brick, as heretofore. Let them go and gather straw for themselves, and the tale of the bricks which they did make heretofore you shall lay upon them, you shall not diminish aught thereof, for they be idle. Therefore they cry, saying, Let us go and sacrifice to our God. There is no straw given unto thy servants. And they say to us, Make brick, and behold, thy servants are beaten, but the fault is in thine own people. Go therefore now and work, for there shall no straw be given you, yet shall you deliver the tale of bricks. And the officers of the children of Israel did see that they were in evil case. After it was said, You shall not minish aught for your bricks of your daily task. Okay, so commentary on Exodus 5 from the Blue Letter Bible reads that this chapter focuses on how Moses and Aaron are trying to deal with Pharaoh in an attempt to get them to have him allow them to go and worship in the wilderness. So they demand in the name of God, and he answers their demand with a defiance of God. So they beg leave in the name of Israel, and he answers their request with further orders to oppress Israel. And it says these orders were executed by the taskmasters, complained of to Pharaoh, but in vain, complained of by the people to Moses, and by him to God. So verses 3-9, so they say, finding that Pharaoh had no veneration at all for God, they try and see if Pharaoh had any compassion for Israel. And that so they, with great humility and modesty, without making any complaint of the rigor with which they were ruled, plead that the journey they were given was that it was not a project formed amongst themselves, but that their God had met with them and called them to it. And then in verses 10-14, it says, Pharaoh's orders are here put in execution, straws denied, and yet the work not diminished. Okay, so what does straw represent in the Bible, right? So it says here, through the Bible study tools, that tibn is mixed with clay for plastering walls or for making sun-dried bricks. It is also mixed with lime and sand for plastering. So the children of Israel had their task of brick making made more arduous by being required to gather stubble and prepare it by chopping it up, instead of being given the already prepared straw of the threshing floors. And they reference Exodus 5:7. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw. And they also say here that tibn, applies to the straw which has been cut up into short pieces and more or less split by the threshing operations. It is commonly used throughout the East as a coarse fodder or roughage for domestic herbivorous animals. And then they say here, straw left in the manger is thrown out in the stall to form part of the bedding in Isaiah 25:10. So the land of the Lord will rest on this mountain, but Moab will be trampled, and there stand as straw is trampled down in the manure. And so the process of threshing is or involves the separating of the grain from the straw. And so the purpose is to separate the valuable from the part that is not as important. Okay, so let's read the verses again. So, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. So that's from Exodus 1:14. Okay, so that's the Israelites in Pharaoh's field. So you shall no more give the people straw to make brick, as hitherfore let them go and gather straw for themselves, in Exodus 5:7. So it says here, a commentary on the verse from Bible Hub. So it has been estimated that this requirement would more than double the people's toil. They would have to disperse themselves over the harvest fields, often lying at a considerable distance from the brick fields, to detach the straw from the soil, gather it into bundles, and convey it to the scene of their ordinary labors. Having done this, they were then required to complete the ordinary tale. So catch that spiritually. And then it says here, persecutors take pleasure in putting contempt and hardship upon ministers. The usual tale of bricks must be made. Thus more work was to be laid upon the men, which, if they performed, they would be broken with labor, and if not, they would be punished. However, with God's grace, for God's anointed, this will not be the case. And so it could imply that Pharaonic figures strive to make it difficult for God's anointed to succeed and place obstacles in their way, which can seem to make tasks twice as difficult to complete or overcome, because there's a greater process involved. There's more that needs to be weeded out, or as a result, there are more steps in the operation of the procedure in order for the action to become complete. So you shall no more give the people straw to make bricks, and also they deprive them of, so they tried to deprive them of the means with which they would need to perform tasks. So you shall no more give the people straw to make brick, as hitherto let them go and gather straw for themselves. So they want to leave them in a much more desperate situation. And then Exodus 5:8, and the tale of the bricks which they did make hitherto, you shall lay upon them, you shall not diminish aught thereof. For they be idle, therefore they cry, saying, let us go and sacrifice to our God. So if we take the last verse to refer to kingdom marriage, so you shall no more give the people straw to make brick. So the devil sends counterfeits, and he perverts reason. And so the people don't have the adequate understanding to honor the institution of marriage in a way which would glorify God. So it says, as hitherto let them go and gather straw for themselves. So let them go and seek out this understanding for themselves in the world or through the Word of God, without having any good reference in their lives or in their awareness. And it says, and the tale of the bricks, and so the tale of these unions which they did make hitherto, you shall lay upon them, you shall lay upon the promises, you shall not diminish aught thereof. So the promise, nothing will, so the value of the promises will not decrease. For they be idle, let's say for though they tarry, therefore they cry, saying, let us go and sacrifice to our God. So the promises, though they tarry, they are eager to, in God's appropriate time, realize the fulfillment and of God's will and word. And this could refer to anything that is in the woodworks or in the workings, or has a process. So it could refer to any project, entrepreneurial endeavor, anything that requires time and has a unique procedure which needs to be worked out in order for the promise to come into its fullest manifestation and become realized in the physical. So it says here in commentary for this verse, the cities they built for Pharaoh were witnesses for them that they were not idle, yet he thus basely misrepresents them, that he might have pretense to increase their burdens. So the cities and then it continues, so the cities could represent the rationale, and therefore it represents the masculine or the prodigal returning, right? So the prodigal is the way that the Lord worked on the prodigal, the cities they built for Pharaoh were witnesses for them. So the way the prodigal son returned home to the Father, to God, was a witness for the stander, that the stander was not idle. Yet thus Pharaoh basically misrepresents the case, either through ignorance or through contempt, that he might have a pretense to judge the situation the way he wants to, so that he may manipulate the situation so that it can fit his claims. And then it continues in another commentary. God will own his people, though poor and despised, and will find a time to plead their case. So Pharaoh treated all he heard with contempt. It says Pharaoh's pride, ambition, covetousness, and political knowledge hardened him to his own destruction. And then it says, what Moses and Aaron ask is very reasonable, only to go 3 days' journey into the desert, and that on a good errand. We will sacrifice unto the Lord our God. Pharaoh was very unreasonable in saying that the people were idle, and therefore talked of going to sacrifice. He thus misrepresents them, that he might have a pretense to add to their burdens. To this day we find many who are more disposed to find fault with their neighbors for spending in the service of God a few hours spared from their worldly business than to blame others who give twice the time to sinful pleasures. Pharaoh's command was barbarous. Moses and Aaron themselves must get to the burdens. Persecutors take pleasure in putting contempt and hardship upon ministers, right? And then I read the rest, because the commentary is similar to the one for Exodus 5:7, and I was reading this for 5:8. Okay, so now, so 5:16 reads, there is no straw given unto thy servants, and they say to us, make brick, and behold, thy servants are beaten, but the fault is in thine own people. Because the servants look to find solutions. However, they can't do so without the appropriate means, right? Since there is no straw given unto thy servants, and they say to us, make brick, and also without the appropriate threshing or standards, regulations, obedience to laws, commandments. There is no straw given unto thy servants, and they say to us, make brick. So there hasn't been a clear value distinction where you can distinguish between you can have clarity to accept the appropriate course of action, because there's no threshing, so there's no separation. So there's no straw given unto thy servants, and they say to us, make brick. So how can they do without anything valuable in whatever shape or form? And behold, thy servants are beaten. They are oppressed and blamed doubly because of the workload, because of their desire to fix things, and because of they're just overwhelmed by what is not valuable. Behold, thy servants are beaten. They are, I wouldn't say defeated, but outnumbered. But the fault is in thine own people, because the people they oppress the servants as well. They outnumber them in their oppression towards them and their hatred for them. So, therefore now, and work, so 5:18, go therefore now and work, for there shall no straw be given you, yet shall you deliver the tale of bricks. So they're going to have to make something from nothing, it seems. And the officers of the children of Israel did see that they were in the evil case, or in the case of evil, after it was said, you shall not minish aught from your bricks of your daily task. Okay, so it says here from Bible study, in a bad condition and circumstance they were, and so there was no likelihood of their getting out of them. Since Pharaoh treated them after this manner, they saw not only that the common people were in a bad condition, in great bondage, misery, distress, to be obligated to get straw, to make brick, and carry it in their full tale as before, but that they themselves were in a bad situation, since for the deficiency in their people they were like to be beaten for it from time to time. And then it goes on to say that after this had been said and confirmed by Pharaoh, they had no hope of things being better with them, but looked upon their unhappy lot as irretrievable. So they didn't want to give them relief. So it says, with a sorrowful and angry countenance, as those that could obtain no relaxation for themselves or for their brethren, did see that they were in the evil case, or looked upon them with sadness or with an evil eye. And then they say here, so Pharaoh had hoped that they would have no hope of things getting better, and looked upon them as if they were irretrievable. They were doomed in this state, in this distressful state and bad condition, this bad situation of deficiency, in which they were likely to have been beaten from time to time or abused under the contempt of idleness and just pure hatred. And then Isaiah 9:10 and 65:3. So the bricks are fallen down, but we build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them into cedars. A people that provoketh me to anger continually to my face, that sacrificeth in gardens, and burneth incense upon altars of brick. Okay, so commentary on this from Bible Hub says, we have reason to be afraid of those that speak well of us when we do ill. Wickedness was universal, all were infected with it. They shall be in trouble and see no way out. And when man's ways displease the Lord, he makes even their friends to be at war with them. God would take away those they thought to have help from. Their rulers were the head, their false prophets were the tail and the rush. The most despicable in these civil contests, men preyed on near relations who were as their own flesh. The people turn not to him, God, who smites them. Therefore he continues to smite. For when God judges, he will overcome, and the proudest, stoutest sinners shall either bend or break. And it says the bricks are fallen down. The language is figurative. The sentiment is plain. That the affairs were in a ruinous and dilapidated state. And it says, but also their self-confident assurance that they would be able to succeed in their evils. Or it says, repair the evils and restore their nation to more than their former magnificence, possibly more glorious in the eyes of hell than the time of Noah. It says the meaning is that their former state was one of less splendor than they designed that their subsequent state should be. Desolation had come in upon their country, in upon Babylon, and this they could not deny. We're just going to say Babylon here, since we read a verse, the earlier verse from Genesis relating to the worship of Baal. And this they could not deny, but they confidently boasted that they would more than repair the evil. They would be able to continue building up this plan of theirs. And it says, with hewn stones, at once more permanent and elegant than the structures of bricks had been. And then the rest of it goes on to break down the rest of the verse with more detail to give you more revelation. So when I initially read this verse, the bricks are fallen down, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them into cedars. I took it to imply the building up of God's temple or community despite its ruinous conditions. And we could still take it to imply that if we just allow God to minister through the words without further, just independent of everything, and just allow him to just relay what he wants to convey, since there's more than one message contained within these verses. But when I read the commentary, they gave me the other side and more context. So there you have a few ways of looking at this verse. And so now Isaiah 65:3, a people that provoketh me to anger continually to my face, that sacrificeth in gardens, and burneth incense upon altars of bricks. So these people, they continue to provoke God with their sinning. They anger continually to my face. They do these things very blatantly despite his warnings, and they seek to build a home for, or a temple for themselves, or for idolatry, as opposed to make this world a dwelling place for God. And they want to receive recognition themselves instead of humble themselves and bring God the glory. And they sacrificeth in gardens. So if we take it to imply, the garden is a place of refuge. It's a sacred space. And so they defile these places. And burneth incense upon altars of brick. And so if we look at the commentary for the verse, it says, so if we look at Ezekiel 20:28 in reference to that sacrifice in gardens. So that verse reads in the NIV, "When I brought them into the land I had sworn to give them, and they saw any high hill or any leafy tree, there they offered their sacrifices, made offerings that aroused my anger, presented their fragrant incense, and poured out their drink offerings." So when God gave these people a gift or a promise, whom he saved, they showed their ingratitude by falling straight back into idolatry, instead of continuing to worship him and sanctify their new city, their new dwelling place, or their blessing. And then if we look at Isaiah 1:29 in the NIV, "You will be ashamed because of the sacred oaks in which you have delighted. You will be disgraced because of the gardens that you have chosen." And then in the New Living Translation, it says, "You will be ashamed of your idol worship in the groves of sacred oaks. You will blush because you worshipped in gardens dedicated to idols." And then burneth incense upon altars of brick, literally on the bricks. They say possibly on the roofs of houses, was common and idolatrous practices of Judah. They say see 2 Kings 23:12, which reads in the NIV, "He pulled down the altars the kings of Judah had erected on the roof near the upper room of Ahaz, and the altars Manasseh had built in the 2 courts of the temple of the Lord. He removed them from there, smashed them to pieces, and threw the rubble into the Kidron Valley." And then Jeremiah 19:13, "The houses in Jerusalem and those of the kings of Judah will be defiled like this place. Topheth, all the houses where they burned incense on the roofs to all the starry hosts and poured out drink offerings to other gods." So the houses in Jerusalem and those of the kings of Judah, those who God called but have fallen back and have defiled themselves. So it says also, it says, with less probability could refer to the brick altars which the exiles are supposed to have used at Babylon and were forbidden by the law in Exodus 20:24-25. You shall make an altar of earth for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stone for me, you shall not build it of cut stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you will profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, so that your nakedness will not be exposed on it. Right, so another commentary says, continually answering to all the day. So God was continually inviting them, and they continually offending him. They reference Isaiah 65:2, Deuteronomy 32:21. They made no attempt to hide their sin, right, to his face, compared to before me. And then they make reference. And then it says, God commanded that his altars be of unhewn stone. This was in order to separate them, even in external respects, from idolaters. Also, as all chiseling was forbidden, they could not inscribe superstitious symbols on them as the heathens did. Bricks were more easy to inscribe than stone, hence their use for the cuneiform inscription at Babylon, and also for idolatrous altars. And so, yes, so the rest of the commentary, of course, continues to say a lot more. Maybe let me see if I'll look at one more. So, yes, so they're reckoned for their sins. It says, yet God did visit on that generation their iniquities and the iniquities of their fathers together. They, having by that act, filled up their measure. They had provoked God continually to anger to his face, either in his temple, the place where he used to manifest himself, more probably also the phrase signifies their impudence, not taking notice of God's omnipresence and omnipotence and omniscience. And it says here, the particular provocations are instances in which they deviate in the matter of divine worship. And then it goes on to describe with greater detail the appointment for incense and what God commanded, and just breaking down the burning incense on brick with another perspective. So then Ezekiel 4:1, thou also, son of man, take thee a tile and lay it before thee, and portray upon it the city, even Jerusalem. So it says, Ezekiel 4, follows that Ezekiel performs a sign act as God commands him, in which, via a symbolic representation, he indicates of a coming siege of Jerusalem, and resulting famine. And so he says, right, so the verse we just read, right, take a clay tablet and lay it before you and portray on it a city, Jerusalem. They say here, living in Babylon, exiled by force from Jerusalem many years before, Ezekiel received God's command to depict Jerusalem on a clay tablet. It was a tablet of soft clay baked to make it durable, such as the Babylonians used for writing purposes. And then it says the practice of sketching a city plain on a clay brick is confirmed by several discoveries by archaeologists. And then he was told to lay siege against it. And then take for yourself an iron plate and set it as an iron wall between you and the city. Then he made an unbreakable barrier between himself and the scene he constructed. This symbolized the barrier between God and Jerusalem, meaning that God will not intervene and rescue Jerusalem in the coming siege. And it was the kind of utensil that the priests used in the temple to prepare some of the offerings. The iron girdle symbolized the wall that stood between God and the sinful Jewish nation, so that he could no longer look on them with approval and blessings. This would be a sign to the house of Israel. They thought there were some amongst the Israelite captives in Babylon and also in Jerusalem who thought that God would defend Jerusalem and rescue her when the Babylonians came against her. This was a sure sign that it would not be so, and acting out the years of iniquity. And so Ezekiel 4, signs of siege and exile from enduring world, and it goes on to break down the rest of the chapter and relay more information. Yeah, and then from the Blue Letter Bible, it says that those who remained in Jerusalem would or should be brought to extreme misery for want of necessary food, all supplies being cut off by the besiegers. And then when I first read the verse, though, so when I read it, thou also son of man, since Jesus, peace be upon him, is referred to as son of man, I took it as thou also lamb, or those, the anointed of God who are coming in the stead, or in lieu of the Messiah's return. Take thee a tile and lay it before thee, and portray upon it the city, even Jerusalem. So write the vision and make it plain. Lay before yourself the promise. So that's another impression or way the verse got an inspired meaning into that verse for me. And right, so the Hebrew, we looked at the Hebrew verses 4, 38, 43, and this is in reference to, once again, verse 36 of the Quran, which reads, Say, verily my Lord enlarges and restricts the provisions to whom he pleases, but most men know not. So allow that all to come together for you. And then the Greek for the same number is pantos. So entirely, specifically, at all events, by all means, altogether surely, without a doubt. So Luke 4:23, and he said unto them, you will surely say unto me this proverb, physician, I'm going to start over. So, and he said unto them, you will surely say unto me this proverb, physician, heal thyself. Whatsoever we have heard done in Capernaum, do also here in thy country. Okay, so here's the commentary from Bible Rep. It says, despite Jesus publicly demonstrating supernatural powers, critics often challenge him to perform one more at their command to prove his message. So even today, such requests are generally insincere. Those who say God must prove himself with a miracle will explain away whatever miracles they might see, or truth as revealed through revelation being expanded. And then it continues. So ignoring what's obvious and demanding something more in a sign of stubbornness, it is not surprising that both God, who confirms it to the Spirit, the truth revealed to the spirit of the doubter, and the prophet who goes to great lengths to make the message easily understood, typically decline such demands from doubters. So it says, Jesus, is peace be upon him, and peace be upon all the prophets I referred to in this word, is reacting to the skepticism of his hometown. He has claimed to be the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy in Luke 4:16-21. In response, the people reply that he is nothing more than another Nazarene boy, like any other they have known. So sensing this resistance, Jesus knows exactly what will come next: a demand to see a miracle. And they have heard about his prior miracles as described in other Gospels. And Mark's account implies that Jesus had already performed a few healings in Nazareth in Mark 6:5. And yet, as he begins to challenge their beliefs, the people begin to want even more greater and more spectacular responses from him. His reply, beginning here, cuts that off, though. He objects before it can even be spoken. The expression, physician, heal yourself, is not exclusively about illness or injury. The point is that one claiming to have solved a problem ought to apply that solution to themselves and those closest to them before taking it to others. In this case, Jesus' hometown neighbors are about to demand that he do the same dazzling works he's done elsewhere. And so his response is that he implies that God will send signs to doubters or Gentiles to Israel if Israel refuses to believe. So he decides to not argue with the stubborn skeptics, but he leaves them to contend with themselves through his reasonable reproaches. Okay, so I'm going to read this commentary for you. It says here, and he said, you will surely say, that is, your approbation now outweighs your prejudices, but it will not be so long. You will soon ask why my love does not begin at home, why I do not work miracles here rather than at Capernaum. It is because of your unbelief, nor is it any new thing for a messenger of God to be despised in his own country. So were both Elijah and Elisha, and thereby driven to work miracles among heathen rather than in Israel. And he said, verily no prophet is accepted in his own country, that is, in his own neighborhood. It generally holds that a teacher sent from God is not so acceptable to his neighbors as he is to strangers. The meanness of his family or lowness of his circumstances brings his office into contempt. Nor can they suffer that he, who was before equal with or below themselves, should now bear superior character. And then Acts 18:21, but bade them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep this feast that cometh in Jerusalem, but I will return again unto you, if God will. And he sailed from Ephesus. What is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. And when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he hath escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live. Okay, I'm going to read this for you. So it says here, God can make strangers to be friends in distress. Those who are despised for homely manners are often more friendly than the more polished, and the conduct of heathens or persons called by barbarians condemns many in civilized nations professing to be true believers. The people thought that Paul was a murderer and that the viper was sent by divine justice to be the avenger of blood. They knew that there is a God who governs the world so that things do not come to pass by chance, not by the smallest event, but all by divine direction, and that evil pursues sinners, that there are good works which God will reward, and wicked works which he will punish. Also that murder is a dreadful crime, one which shall not long go unpunished, but they thought all wicked people were punished in this life, though some are made examples in this world, to prove that there is a God and a providence, yet many are left unpunished to prove that there is a judgment to come. Or I would like to say that there is a double punishment in this life, but there is an evil double punishment, even double punishment in the one to come. But there must be a punishment in this life in order for there to be justice. And God brings about justice to bring about harmonizing and balance and order. So they also thought all who were remarkably afflicted in this life were wicked people. Divine revelation sets this matter in a true light. Good men often are greatly afflicted in this life for the trial and increase of their faith and patience. And it says, observe Paul's deliverance from the danger, and thus in the strength of the grace of God, believers shake off the temptations of Satan with holy resolution when we despise the censures and reproaches of men, and look upon them with holy contempt, having the testimony of our conscience for us, then like Paul we shake off the viper into the fire. It does us no harm except we are kept by it from our duty. God hereby made Paul remarkable among these people, and so made way for the receiving of the gospel of unity. The Lord raises up friends for his people in every place, whither he leads them, and makes them blessings to those in affliction. And then we have in Romans 3:9, what then are we better than they? No, in no wise. For we have before proved both Jews and Gentiles that they are all under sin. And so Paul is making the point that the state of man is one of a fallen nature, or at the beginning, since that is the state in which he is born into. And so therefore all men are sinners more or less, and therefore no one better than another. And so, however, we do have glorious hope through God's grace, and everyone is in need of salvation, which is provided by God. And so all people should have solidarity in these good gifts and in the mercy of the Lord. And so therefore all men should be humble, and there should be a fear as well as the love of God before their eyes. And so that it is with God's help that we are perfected in righteousness and able to strive to greater heights of holiness and virtue. And so that's what this verse relays. And so then let's follow that up with the last 4 verses for this number. So 1 Corinthians 5:10, 9:10, 9:22, 16:12. Yet not altogether with the fornicators of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or with idolaters, for then must you needs go out of the world. Or saith he it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and that he that thresheth in hope should be partaker of his hope. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. As touching our brother Apollos, I greatly desired him to come unto you with the brethren, but his will was not at all to come at this time, but he will come when he shall have convenient time. Okay, so I feel like most of these verses, or the first 3, were pretty self-explanatory. And so I'm just going to read commentary on the last one for you. So it says here, to help me put to words what God is saying, says, one of the issues dividing the Corinthian church was a completely unnecessary conflict over which apostle or teacher the people should be loyal to, right? So Paul rejected this as foolish and made it clear that he did not consider other Christian leaders or believing leaders who believe in God and have a relationship with God, including Apollos, to be competition, but instead God's fellow workers. In 1 Corinthians, right, 3:9. And then it says here, follows up with, Apollos had been working with Paul in Ephesus when Paul decided to send Timothy and others to Corinth. He writes now that he strongly urged Apollos to go as well. This should demonstrate to the Corinthians once more that Paul does not see himself in competition with Apollos, and in fact would see great value in Apollos spending more time with the Corinthians. So Apollos, though, chose not to go. Language experts disagree whether the text should read that it was God's will for Apollos not to go, or if Apollos himself simply did not want to go. And it says some suggest that perhaps Apollos did not want to add to the division among the Corinthians by spending time with them again, but that is mere speculation. And then Paul adds that Apollos will come when he has opportunity, and then so he says that he tells them that Apollos will not be coming to visit them right away. However, he urges them to be on guard and stand firm in the faith, and likely against false teachers. So they must stand strong, but do everything in love. He tells them to submit and give recognition to people like those of Stephanos' household. These devoted servant leaders were the first Christians in Corinth and greatly encouraged him by coming to see him in Ephesus. So at the close of his letter, he curses those who do not love the Lord, apparently implying false teachers, and prays that the grace of the Lord be on everyone else. Okay, let me see if I feel led to read you a couple of the commentaries from Bible Hub. Alright, so let me read this to you and just catch all of this spiritually as it relates to you and your circumstances, and allow God to bring all of these things together for you to really describe with vivid detail what is occurring at this time, and give you much more comprehensive understanding and guidance in your circumstances. So it says here, Timothy came to do the work of the Lord, therefore to vex his spirit would be to grieve the Holy Spirit. To despise him would be to despise him that sent him. Those who work the work of the Lord should be treated with respect. Faithful ministers will not be jealous of each other. It becomes the ministers of the gospel of unity to show concern for each other's reputation and usefulness. Okay, so it says here that as touching our brother Apollos, St. Paul, free from the smallest spark of personal jealousy, had wished that Apollos, whose name had been used as the designation of a faction in opposition to the apostle himself, should go with this letter to Corinth. So St. Paul had planted, Apollos had watered that church, and in the absence of the planter, Apollos would have been the most likely and proper person to exercise authority there. The unselfish consideration of St. Paul is equaled by the thoughtful reluctance of Apollos, who fears that his presence might encourage the one faction and perhaps embitter the other, and he declines, not considering it a convenient time to do so. In the thought of these teachers, convenient meant the good of Christ's church or of the believing community, and not the ease or comfort of any individual man. Right, and so this one here says, but Paul assures them that he designed to come among them, that Apollonius, at some future time. This was said probably to show them that he still retained his affections for them and had a tender solicitude for their peace and prosperity. So he was not offended, and he did have a desire to come among them. Yes, so I'm going to read the verse from the Quran one more time. So it's verse 36, and it reads, so say, verily my Lord enlarges and restricts the provision to whom he pleases, but most men know not. So apply this in relationship to each of these verses to really get a deeper understanding and allow God to, like I said earlier, bring it all together and show you how these relationships correlate with what is going on in your lives at the present time. And I pray that this word really ministered to you, it edified your spirit, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one, where I will be reading verse 37. And if you want a preview, I'll read it for you now. And that verse has 3 notes attributed to it. So on this page, there's 1 number, and then on the following page, there's 2 numbers. So we can do the entire verse. It says, it is not your wealth nor your sons that will bring you nearer to us in degree, but only those who believe and work righteousness. These are the ones to whom there is a multiplied reward. For their deeds, while secure, they reside in the dwellings on high. And so, yes. So, it is not your wealth nor your sons that will bring you nearer to us, 38:44. And a multiplied reward, 38:45, in the dwellings on high, 38:46. So, thank you so much for listening to the end, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next word. So take care till then, and bye-bye for now.